Very good morning to all the dignitaries on stage and dear friends and students. Thank you for all the good words spoken about me, and in fact it's my privilege to be here, to meet you, to interact with you. Primarily because this book that I'm going to talk to you is about a majority of you. It is about your day-to-day life, everyday experiences, the way your identity is defined, the way you look at your own history and the way others shape your history. So I feel in many ways I am obliged to talk, to interact with Muslim women in Kerala and take my book out to them and listen to them. Because otherwise it would be a very a homogeneous kind of imposition on your lives, in the sense the author writes and leave the book there and just think that okay, let them take it or not. I don't want to be that kind of an author. I want to listen to you and want to know what you feel about it, and would also want to change my opinions and think more about it as the book is received in the community where on which it is written about. Yeah, so that's about the book. But before we start the discussion, again, it's a pleasant morning for me. Every year we get a lot of students from this region in IFLU, in IFLU and ETSI, of course, your teachers here know that. But I would ask, and a lot of Muslim girls and boys also come there looking for a kind of academic exploration of their lives, I would say. A lot of students from the region have come there and have taken a different perspective on their understanding of history, politics, nationalism, etc. So I would say, I really would be happy if at least some of you who are here would take up the entrance this year also and come to IFLU. And then I can say, okay, there was some sort of an inspiration from my end also, so that these students ended up. I'm not saying that coming to IFLU will change your lives, but these are central institutions that anybody can access. And you should take that opportunity, explore that opportunity and make the best out of it. It's like universities are yours. It's not that somebody else owns it. University, we keep telling this to the students. Educational institutions are meant for the students. If students don't go, they are nothing. Okay, so you should also explore whatever is available in the country. It's all yours to take. It's the endless amount of funding that comes to these institutions. It's taken in the name of the students. And therefore, you have every right to occupy all the premier institutions in the country. And you should try that chance. And even outside, not just limit your goals to what is available in the country, move further forward. Yeah, so now about the book. Actually, as Osa mentioned, he's a good friend, and in fact I called him and said I wrote this book and I'm coming to Kerala and I want to interact with people in relation to the book, and immediately he could arrange some of these events, and I'm so grateful to Osa for this. Thank you very much. And yeah, so when I tried to pick up some important points from this book for conversation, I don't exactly know what is more important or what can I present in this talk. I would encourage all of you to read the book, kind of have a conversation with the book, and you can always write to me, or you can even write in public about it. I will be quite happy if I get that kind of a response. But primarily all I can say is the book is on Muslim women, and if you are familiar with the academic scene, maybe ever since the 9/11 incident, there is an increased interest on the Muslim world, the idea of culture, how it is getting shaped there. So everyone is talking about Islam all of a sudden, but not the kind of talk we might want people to talk about us. But there's a lot of discussion on it, about the Muslim culture, the question of faith, the way of, the idea of everyday life that shape Muslim identities. So all these are so much out there in the public. And this is when I started my research in the area too. And why did I choose this particular topic for discussion? I studied, as your head of the department pointed out, I studied in a college in southern Kerala. I did my undergraduation there. And that time, the campus vocabulary was not like this, in the sense there was only one kind of political association possible in a campus, and that was a large left identity. So if you are an intellectual, if you are reading, if you are writing, invariably you can only associate with the left movement in our campus. So you become a left, even I myself was part of the left movement at that time. So what I'm trying to say is all our intellectual aspirations were shaped by the only available identity of the intellectual, which was the left identity. So when you say you're political, when you say you're an intellectual, when you say you're an academic, invariably you get drawn into that left identity. And then within that circle, I was also trying to define myself, and I had to face questions like, Sherin is a deceptive name in Kerala, especially in the south. It's not Sherin, it's Sherin. So usually you get taken for a Hindu or a Christian or somebody of another religion, but not a Muslim woman. And then that came up as a large question before me, because people would ask me what my religion is, and I would say, and I grew up in a non-practicing background. My father had a very strong communist orientation, so I grew up in a non-practicing background, and I was not a practicing person either, so I just used to say I'm a Muslim. And suddenly the answer would be, you don't look like a Muslim, which was slightly shocking for me. In a very left-oriented group, I will be told that you don't look like a Muslim, which made me think, what is it to look like a Muslim? Is there anything like looking like a Muslim? Or why is looking like a Muslim so important for people who are not Muslims? And this made me think further about my own identity, where I belong to, what I have to say about my being Muslim. And I didn't know whether it's a compliment or whether it is a negative comment or whether it is a neutral statement, what they meant by this looking like a Muslim. And I felt three things in it. One is an insinuation, being a Muslim, you don't look like a Muslim, so you are deceiving us. Second one is like, we have an idea of Muslim woman and you don't fit into that idea. That was the second point. And the third point was to myself, that I was asking this question, should I look like a Muslim or should I not look like a Muslim to live in this country? And when I started thinking about these questions were not that important. But now, and this is like, I'm standing in a context after 9/11, after Babri Masjid, after Gujarat massacre. So after all these, when I think about is looking like a Muslim important, it has a lot of implications. And maybe that is where I started my, the premise of my research is set in that particular context. In fact, that was my research question or a statement. You all start with a research statement, you don't look like a Muslim. So this is maybe the kind of like, you know, the seed for this book. And then I started asking various questions, following up different threads, and very few have been written on women and Islam in India, I realized. Mostly all those writings available on Muslim women would be about the backwardness of Muslim women. They are not educated, they are like married and thrown away just like that, according to the whims and fancies of men. They have a very pitiful state of existence. They are poor, they are not empowered, they are victims. And this was the only literature available. Most of the scholarly intervention on Muslim women's lives would be on the backwardness of Muslim women. Then there was another terrain upon which Muslim women's lives were explored, that was the legal terrain. Post Shabano, everyone had a whole lot of interest on Muslim lives. Of course, there is a lot of vested interest on this. I am sure you would be familiar with the Shabano case and the rest of the proceedings. And so Muslim women in the legal context had a lot of implication. So everyone would talk about personal law. Muslim women is a victim of personal law. Therefore, we need uniform civil code, and let us think about marriages in a uniform way in the country. So Muslim women are victims of Islamic law. That was another statement that was easily available in the public sphere. And recently also on the triple talaq issue, you would have heard this. A lot of people trying to tell Muslim women that you are victims and triple talaq is the major problem in your life, and once you resolve this, all your problems will be over, kind of a situation. So in all these approaches, what I felt lacking was a real engagement with Muslim women's lives. A real engagement with what is happening in the lives of Muslim women. What is the history of this community and its group of women? That's what I started with. And in my journey, I encountered a lot of, I came across a lot of inspiring information, a lot of things about the history of Muslim women which were not written on or written about, especially in the state of Kerala. Actually the book is divided into different chapters, and each of this engages with a particular aspect of Muslim women's life. In the first chapter, I look at places of religious worships and the Sufism as a practice, how that promoted the spread of Islam in this country, and the active role of Muslim women in this practice. In conversions, in promoting religious conversions, in kind of establishing a community surrounding the places of worship. For instance, in Trivandrum there is a place called Bhima Palli. In Pudupunani there is another Jaram. And in these it's not just that these women act as goddesses there or such Sufi saints. There is also an active role happening in terms of building a community surrounding those spaces. For instance, Bhima Palli and Bhima Bivi, if you go to that place, you also understand that the entire lot of people who live in those premises, they are politically charged and they are like, you know, politically organizing surrounding the identity of this one image of a woman. And likewise, the whole role of Muslim women in the early pre-colonial conversions, and later I also deal a little bit about this whole myth of conversion and the idea of Arakkal dynasty and all that. So what I was trying to say is that, like, you know, the stories we hear about Muslim women would be like stories of victims, whereas the images that circulate among these communities, these spaces, would be an entirely different thing. The role that these people, these women take in the lives of the people who live in those communities are much larger than what we can imagine. And likewise, another instance in history that I look at is the reform context in Kerala. You all must be familiar with the reform movements in Kerala, like Nabodhanam. We always talk about Kerala Nabodhanam as a very important phenomenon, and we would say Nabodhanam is what brought all this cultural emancipation in Kerala. But the thing is, like, again, if you read reform history, what you come across is the history of different Hindu communities and probably a few instances of Dalit movements. But beyond that, there is no active role for Muslims in this particular period in history. But that's not what exactly happened if you look into the context in detail. And I looked at, particularly looked at the work of Halima Bibi, the woman editor who had her own printing press and who was like printing and publishing and producing so much of writing on women's activism and women's lives. And it's not just that, okay, this great person lived in history. I was also looking at a lot of journals that were produced in the 1930s, 1920s. What inspired me was like in a 1927 or 28 copy of a journal, I came across a translation of Rokeya Sakhawat Hussein's Sultana's Dream. This was published in English in 1927, and the next year it is translated to Malayalam by a Muslim woman, and it is coming out in a journal in Malayalam. And this is like a surprising thing for me, because we were not thinking that there were readers to those kind of materials among Muslim women at that particular time. In 1 year's gap, something that came out in English. Sakhawat Hussain used to write both in Urdu and English, and Sultana's Dream was her English writing. And even now we teach that in colleges and all as part of women's literature and women's writings. And this got published in 1928 in Kerala for not the larger public. These were small magazines circulated among the Muslim community for Muslim women to read. And it had such kind of readers, that means Muslim women were not just victims, they were doing a lot of very empowered kind of activities. And so that was also another, so in many ways these old journals, these texts that I went through, they were motivating, they were encouraging, they were giving me a totally different idea of Muslim women. And then, like, against all my findings, I also wanted to read these things along with the contemporary discussions and debates on Muslim women in Kerala. So there I wanted to say, or I'm trying to say, what all these entire idea, the entire contemporary discussions, it is kind of focusing on two ideas. One is to bring out Muslim women as victims of this religion, whereas that's not the case. And I pick up a couple of instances. One is like a book which is written on Muslim women, a novel that has came out in the 2000, I think this came out somewhere in the first decade of the 21st century, Barsa. At least some of you would have read this book, Khadija Mumtaz's Barsa. And I found that the book is very disturbing. It was disturbing for me because it is depicting a very different picture of Muslim women. In the sense, in Barsa, what you come across is a very prejudiced description of Muslim women. Muslim women as victims, Muslim women as shaped by the ethos of religion alone, and Muslim women do not have any kind of agency other than being victims. So this particular book troubled me also because the book in some ways attained the status of a book on Muslim women in Kerala. And everywhere it was discussed, and again, like, so in an already charged atmosphere which would talk about Islam as a very patriarchal religion, the book caught like fire, and people started reading and discussing this book. So in that sense, so I had to kind of place this book side by side with a lot of other things I was engaging with. Then I also picked up a couple of instances in Kerala where Muslim women came out as topics of discussion. One is, I don't know, maybe you would have been quite in your schools when this happened. There was an instance where a woman in northern Kerala, she was, it became a controversy because she came out in public and she said that she is forced to wear a burqa and she doesn't want to wear it. And Rayana Khasi, her name was. And I could totally understand her feelings. I was quite okay with the whole thing, and when we were discussing this, we were all thinking it's her right and she can decide what she wants to. But the problem was that it became a kind of feminist moment in Kerala, and a lot of feminists who didn't have anything to do with Islam and the whole structure and the idea of faith, they started commenting on this and started blaming Muslim men for trying to kind of enforce this attire on her. Now the problem is not with her aspiring for something different. Problem is not even when she says that this is my way of living. The problem is when this becomes a huge commotion in our society, where there were a lot of other inequalities, a lot of other things happening. For instance, side by side Gujarat was happening. Along with that, a whole lot of other, the post 9/11 situation where a whole lot of accusations on Islam, terrorism, all these were happening. In that kind of a society, this rhetoric will easily get publicized and portray the Muslim male as the eternal predator kind of a person. Okay, he is so aggressive, all he does is to kind of enforce clothing on its women. So that image of Muslim woman as the victim, Muslim male as the aggressive patriarch, that's a popular media image. If you look at the movies that you watch, the Muslim father, the Muslim brother is like that kind of, I'm talking about the popular cinema, not the new kind of interventions which are happening. So that's the image of the Muslim male. So woman as the victim, male as the predator, and this image of the victim, in so many ways, this feminist solidarity from outside for the Muslim woman is not helping Muslim women, I felt. It's not just my idea, and this has been taken up by many people all over the world. For instance, during the Afghan war, when America started bombing Afghanistan against Taliban, what happened was, along with that, in the United States, there was a feminist movement. And the movement was titled Save Afghan Women. And who was the head of this movement? It was the American president's wife, Laura Bush. And she, along with a lot of first world feminists, started this campaign. So on one side, America is bombing this place and destroying whatever infrastructure, whatever they had on one side. And on the other end, the feminists are leading a campaign saying, save Afghan women. So now what is the implication of this particular thing? It's like, in some ways, feminists is helping US government to get an international credibility over bombing Afghanistan. So this reading, this is again not my reading, this has been pointed out by the famous anthropologist Laila Pulukho. And so every moment when this idea of save Muslim women come up, there is also a hidden agenda of annihilation of a community, annihilation of a place. For instance, if you think about triple talaq, who led the triple talaq campaign? The very people who were behind all those atrocities that happened to Muslim women in this country started triple talaq as a campaign. And when that came up as a campaign, all of a sudden it's like saving Muslim women. But from whom? Saving Muslim women from Muslim male, from Muslim community, not beyond that.
So the saving ends within the premises of that religion. You save Muslim women from the community, from men, but beyond that, what is happening? You don't save them for education, you don't save them for a better future, you don't even save them for a secure life in this country. Because if you look at what is happening to Muslim women in many parts of the country, the saving doesn't go beyond that particular image of triple talaq or that particular idea of uniform civil code. So all these saving mentality of feminism in many ways is not helping Muslim women, or we have not seen them helping Muslim women in any constructive ways. And that is one thing I have been kind of engaging with in this book. Like this whole idea of patronization, this whole idea of saving, this whole idea of protecting Muslim women is not for the benefit of Muslim women, but it has a lot of other implications, other repercussions. So it's like, of course, maybe Muslim women need gender equality within the community and outside the community. At this moment, what is more important, what is required more? It's like saying, for instance, and this has happened not in the context of Muslim women, it has happened all over the country in all cases of marginalization. When it comes to national questions, when it comes to questions of identity, when it comes to citizenship rights, the marginalized populations are always kept outside. But suddenly, if somebody has to point at a community and say, there is patriarchy in that community, it's an easy way of keeping that community aside. So addressing the patriarchy within a community is easier than addressing the larger marginalization they experience as citizens in the country. And so at a particular moment, Muslim women's lives are not shaped just by Islamic patriarchy. All religions are patriarchal in many ways. It's not just Islam which is patriarchal. And impositions of clothing and impositions, clothing itself in many ways, that's another important thing that I also was thinking about at that point. Because every time you talk about Muslim women, you talk about the question that I started with, looking like a Muslim. Clothing becomes very important. But there is this famous anthropologist, Saba Mahmood, who died recently, very young she died. And Saba Mahmood says this, feminism in many ways associates itself with clothing, for instance. Feminist movement, if you look at the progress in feminist movement's history, you see a lot of engagements with clothing. And there is some sort of an obsession. So if you're free, and Saba Mahmood precisely talk about this, she says, if a woman color her hair, if a woman wears mini skirts, if a woman apply lipstick, if a woman is like, wearing a sleeveless, these kind of, she mentions all these. And she says, if you do this, you think she is a feminist. But if a woman believes, if a woman adorns a veil in her faith, and if a woman thinks that, okay, my religion asks me to wear this, I am doing it in my faith, in my belief, in my kind of like, it's a kind of relationship between me and my God. If a woman says that, we think she's oppressed. So a woman in burqa, according to feminists, is oppressed, whereas a woman who is wearing miniskirt and short dresses and colored hair, how can she be a feminist? So this is the question Saba Mahmood asks the society. And I feel it's a very important question that feminists need to address. So why do you give so much of importance to clothing? And you yourself would have experienced, I don't know, maybe because in the society in which you live, there is a lot of representation of Muslim population. Whereas in circles outside, for instance, in a campus in Hyderabad, or Hyderabad is also slightly better in terms of Muslim representation, but if you go to other places in India, if you have a feminist gathering and if you see a woman in burqa walking into a feminist gathering, suddenly people get very skeptical. What is she doing here? She's not supposed to be here. She's not a feminist. But that's how prejudices take us to that level of an understanding. We think that burqa and feminism will not go together. So these kind of concepts are countered, it is discussed, it's widely read among scholars outside India. But in India, even now, we kind of tend to think that feminism means something else. Feminism means like something that goes with what we call as modernity. And that is where the other part of my book's title, The Politics of Modernity, comes in. We think that modernity, or to be modern, to be liberated, to be political, we think that it won't go along with faith. We think that to be modern is anti-religious. We think that to be modern is also anti-faith. If I say I believe, then I'm not really modern. If I say I want to obey the dictates of my religion, suddenly I become anti-modern. So this whole politics of modernity, you have to be modern to be in certain ways, that has to be discussed a lot more. When we started, in the initial stages of some of the student movements in different universities in India, people used to have problems with certain kinds of celebrations, for instance. Certain celebrations are treated as modern, national, universal kind of celebrations. For instance, in Kerala, Onam. Onam is treated as a very neutral kind of celebration. Whereas, so if you think about its politics, it has very strong religious symbols, right? The associations that the Tiruvadira recently became very controversial. So what is Tiruvadira? It's how does it become Kerala's national dance? I would want to do Opana or something else as my national dance. Will I be really allowed? So certain symbols easily pass as secular. If I wear a settumunda and if I have that kind of clothing, I can become a Malayali. But if I wear something else, I won't become a Malayali. Why? Did women in Kerala some 100 years before they were wearing this? No. Sari itself was kind of like a promoted dress which came up as part of Indian nationalist movement. Sari was not what our ancient men and women or women were wearing. If you look at Ravi Verma's painting, you know how he promotes sari as a modern clothing. So it developed at a particular phase in Indian nationalist movement as part of the Bhadra Mahila, the upper caste woman's clothing in Bengal. And then slowly they made that the identity of Indian woman. Likewise in Kerala, if you have to think about the kind of clothings we promote as national, I don't think those are like clothes that many can associate. Okay, if it is beautiful, you can, or even I wear it occasionally. But I don't want to claim that that is secular and something else is religious. So this giving the mark of secular to certain celebrations, certain kinds of clothing, certain kinds of behavior, whereas treating some others as marginalized and archaic and backward, there is a kind of discrepancy in the way we practice secularism. There is a kind of unevenness in the way we practice and understand secularism. So Onam is secular, whereas Christmas or Eid or Bakrid is not secular. Or wearing this cloth is secular, whereas the Mapla clothing or the Christian clothing is not secular. So these kind of demarcations often come with what you call as a majority religiosity. In many cases, in the West, for instance, if you study the history of Western secularism, a lot of post-secular scholars have pointed out that Christianity got into a very modern kind of identity, and whatever you practice as part of Western modernity is actually Christian beliefs and thinkings. Likewise, in India, if you think, the majority religiosity disguises itself as secular in many ways. So this is not like I'm trying to bring in a very separatist kind of idea. It's not that, but it's just thinking a little more. And if you think about whatever we practice as secular, it has a 60% to 70% majority religiosity added on to it. So this discrepancy is something that we need to think further about. So the way you construct secularism is problematic. What you think of as, so that is where, which brings back the question, do you look like a Muslim? Looking like a Muslim becomes problematic. Nobody will ask a person wearing a setumund, okay, what's your religion? He is a Malayali or she is a Malayali. Whereas nobody will call a man wearing a munda and say, okay, you are a Nair or you are whatever. Nobody will address. But the moment you move away from that, you are a Muslim, you are a Christian. So these kind of problematic questions, these kind of associations, and this larger regional identities which disguise a lot of majority religiosities that need to be explored. Probably the unevenness in citizenship rights, the way in which the minorities are marginalized, that is also disguised in these kind of questions that we never dare to ask. So you will be asked, what is your religion? Okay, you won't call the majority religiosity out in public. You won't say you are Nair, you are Nambudiri, you are this, you are that. I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm trying to say that the way in which minority religions are demarcated, given spaces, that never happens with the majority religion. And this unevenness, and this is not something that the minorities should take effort to remove. As ethical citizens, it is the duty of the feminists, the academics, the intellectuals to address this question. It's not for the Muslims in this country to come out and protest the CAA thing, I think, because if it is a secular country as it claims, it's the duty of the academics, the intellectuals, the politicians who claim they represent the whole of India to protect the minority rights in this country. That's what I have to say to feminism also. When you're talking about feminism, don't just look at one particular community and say the women there are oppressed. It's to see the larger implications of those questions. And Dalit women, even before Muslim women, have stated this very strongly in this country. They said, of course there is Dalit patriarchy, but that doesn't mean because our men are already marginalized in the society, we don't want to point fingers at them again and say, okay, you are oppressing us. We have to look at the casteist structure in this country. There's a larger casteist structure. Likewise, what are the day-to-day dangerous situations that a Muslim male go through in this country? You go to certain parts of the country, even having a beard is not a safe thing. You don't even have to be a Muslim. They can get killed, they can get stopped, they can get questioned, they can get people pelt stones at them for all kinds of things happen. And in that kind of a vulnerable situation, talking about Muslim patriarchy is not the first thing feminism should do. That's what I feel. I feel if feminism is an ethical movement, it should talk about education, it should talk about rights for Muslim women to survive properly in this country, safe living situations. And that is more important than talking about internal patriarchies. Yeah, so I'll stop here, and then if you have questions, we can talk more. You can ask me in Malayalam. I can speak Malayalam as well, so you can ask me, or you can, if you have something to say against what I said, you can point that out also. Thank you.